1, 2, 3.
While our weekly shows are edited to time for broadcast on public TV and community radio, we offer to our members and podcast subscribers the full uncut conversation. The following is from our episode featuring award-winning journalist and international best-selling author Naomi Klein and author, filmmaker, and co-founder of the Debt Collective, Astra Taylor. Together, they recently co-authored a revelatory essay for The Guardian titled The Rise of End Times Fascism. These audio exclusives are made possible thanks to our member supporters.
If you have been trying to make sense, as I have, of the chaos that has set in ever since Donald Trump took office for the second time and his largest donor, the world's richest man, took a chainsaw to our government, then you may have run across the words broligarchy, nerd Reich, dark Gothic MAGA, cataclysm capitalism, or techno-feudalism. These are all attempts to name what is going on. And to that list, our guests, Naomi Klein and Astra Taylor, are adding one more: end times fascism. In a recent essay for The Guardian, they write that, quote, today's right-wing leaders and their rich allies are not just taking advantage of catastrophes, shock doctrine, and disaster capitalism style, but simultaneously provoking, planning, and seeking to profit off the apocalypse. That makes these uniquely dangerous end times, Taylor and Klein argue. But some things do need to end. The right's nihilistic vision needs to be met by a life-affirming one if we want people, planet, and society to have a future. We last spoke to award-winning author and journalist Naomi Klein about her New York Times best-selling book Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World. She's also the author of The Shock Doctrine, No Logo, and many more, and is the founding co-director of the University of British Columbia's Center for Climate Justice. Author, organizer, and filmmaker Astra Taylor was last here talking about her book, The Age of Insecurity, coming together as things fall apart. She's the co-founder of the Debt Collective and the co-author with Leah Hunt Hendricks of Solidarity, the past, present, and future of a world-changing idea. So, what is end times fascism? Perhaps end times humanism? Do we have a future? Let's dive in. Naomi Klein, Astra Taylor, so glad to have you with us again here on Laura Flanders and Friends. Friends, welcome.
Great to be with you.
Thanks for having us.
So let's start with the basics. What is end times fascism? Naomi, you want to take a first swipe?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that it's fascism without a horizon for the future. And, you know, this piece of ours draws on a lot of different analyses and our own work over many decades, tracking the right and understanding that things don't just repeat, history accumulates. And we are in, you know, it's become a cliche, but, you know, we are in the kind of age of consequences for so many crises that have been foretold and are now happening, right? Whether it's, you know, we see it with the reality that we are now in the teeth of the climate crisis, or whether it's COVID, you know, whether it's, you know, compounding nuclear threats. The right is changing in response to the reality of these overlaying existential threats. So some of this draws on the work of Richard Seymour and his work Disaster Nationalism, where he makes this observation, and I taught his course this semester, I taught his book this semester, where he talks about how the fascists of the 1920s and 30s and 40s in Europe did have a horizon post Armageddon, if you will, right? That there was the bloodbath, but then after the bloodbath, there was a vision of a kind of a pastoral, peaceful future for those who were the Aryan in-group, right? You just had to get through it. And if you really pay attention, although Trump talks about a golden age and so on, nobody really believes it, right? It is really, I think we're seeing a kind of fascism that is much more nihilistic, that really takes the end of the world for granted. So you have these overlay, and this is what Astra and I try to kind of pick apart, is like, what is the Venn diagram that connects the the Christian evangelicals who really believe in a rapture, and that's part of why they're egging on the genocide in Palestine, because they believe that that land needs to be cleansed of the non-Jews in order to bring about the return of the Messiah, and so that there can be the final sort of elevator ride up to the sky for the chosen and the rest sort of burn below. What's the overlap between them, the tech oligarchs, who are increasingly thinking about their own elevator ride to the sky or to the AI singularity, to Mars, their rocket ships, and the national, like hyper nationalist MAGA crowd who are fortressing the nation state. And this is what we came up with, that there is this common sort of narrative structure, which is not to say that they are all the same, that they all believe the same things, but you can identify a really dangerous common narrative structure in the story that they're telling, which takes the end for granted. And that is what we really need to pay attention to.
Astra, turning to you, you start in the article by describing the Freedom Cities idea and exploring that project, which many of us have heard nothing about. Can you explain?
Prospera is one example of a fantasy that has been brewing on the sort of libertarian tech right for the last few decades. And it is a fantasy based on this idea of exit. This idea that rich people should be able to exit from nation states, from regulations, and especially from taxes, and start what they call freedom cities, which are really sort of hyper-capitalist, often now sort of cryptocurrency aligned cities or nation states. And this was very marginal, often kind of absurd. Prospera is not doing very well, and in fact is the subject of litigation. But they found themselves at the heart of power with the Trump administration. And so on the campaign trail, Trump sort of unexpectedly made a promise that he would forward an agenda of freedom cities on federal lands. And so the people involved in this have been on kind of a lobbying blitz, trying to take this promise and make it reality. And what we say is that it is emblematic of this fantasy of abandoning this world, right? Abandoning all obligations, and that it is a sort of metaphor for what these end times fascists are all about. And the idea is that, if you're wealthy, you should be able to, again, exit from society and go somewhere where the laws don't apply to you. And so, the tech billionaires, people like Peter Thiel, Balaji Srinivasan is another one of them, talk about sovereign individuals, right? That basically there's going to be a special set of people who live like gods while the rest of us sort of suffer and toil. And so we think that this idea of freedom cities needs to be taken seriously in this moment, because what they're trying to do is sort of reinvent the old ambitions and privileges of empire and imperialism, and create sort of hyper corporate crypto fiefdoms where again, laws, regulations, taxes don't apply to them.
For a little bit more about what's happening in Honduras, here's the promotional video from Prospera.
Prospera is building the fastest growing private city project in the world, elevating human potential through a radically decentralized private governance framework. Legacy systems of governance keep individuals from reaching their full potential. Prospera provides a pro-innovation governance framework, creating the most transparent and efficient business environment in the world. Our system for legal, regulatory, and tax are designed to be an economic supercharger, massively easing business operations and unlocking new opportunities for innovation in industries like finance, medicine, construction, and more. Prospera partners with global leaders in architecture and urban development to build new cities on this platform, creating transformative investment opportunities. Our platform is currently powering the next generation Prospera city on the island of Roatan in Honduras, as well as an emerging prosperity hub on the Honduran mainland, with more locations planned worldwide. Prospera has strong legal stability protections, protected by international treaty for a minimum of 50 years. The 32 square mile island of Roatan is the location of Prospera's first city-scale development. The community's current footprint is over 400 acres and is easily accessible via direct commercial flights from Houston, Dallas, Atlanta, Miami, and other major U.S. and international airports, straight to the island. Prospera's development is conveniently located within a 20-minute drive of Roatan's International Airport, making it easy to travel directly from the United States to Prospera in just a few hours. Since its founding in the year 2020, Prospera's first development has grown from a greenfield site to include a host of world-class amenities. These include the pristine Bay Resort, Roatan's largest and most exclusive resort property, featuring villas, a hotel, private beaches, restaurants, an 18-hole Pete Dye golf course, and more. The commercial district offers Class A office space, with additional properties currently under construction. Prospera is home to some of the world's most innovative new companies, pioneering innovations in fintech, gene therapy, robotic construction, and more. If you're an entrepreneur on the forefront of the latest innovations, an investor seeking new opportunities for growth, or a 21st century pioneer searching for a beautiful destination where you can freely pursue your dreams, Prospera is the place for you. You can become a Prospera resident online today and create your business in just a few minutes from anywhere in the world. As the private governance services provider for the jurisdiction, Prospera Incorporated provides investors an opportunity to accelerate the city's growth and participate in the upside. The company is currently accepting investment in a $150 million convertible note offering for international investors worldwide and for accredited investors in the United States. Prospera is building the future of human governance, privately run and for profit. Join us today at prospera.hn.
So they don't really care about government because they're not going to be subject to it? Is that the idea, Naomi?
Well, I think that the reason why we're really paying close attention to this, and these ideas have been, as Astra said, they've been percolating for a long time. Peter Thiel is almost always involved as a funder in some way or another. There was this idea, seasteading for a while back. I've followed it because there's somebody else who's always involved, who is the grandson of Milton Friedman, Patrick Friedman. So it's kind of the logical extension of just deregulated capitalism. Milton Friedman didn't really see much of a role for the state except for protection of private property and policing. And his grandson, Patrick Friedman, wants to take it even further, right? And so they had this idea that you could create your own country on floating oil rigs, and the countries would compete with one another for who offered the best deal for rich people. And this is a quote from their website, Laura, you could vote with your boat and go from one seasteading nation state to the other. But there's increasingly been a subtext of prepperism in all of these projects, right? Now, a lot of these, the same people who are behind Prospera are now interested in creating a corporate fiefdom, corporate nation state in Greenland, right? A lot of it is about getting ready for, if you'll excuse me, the shit hitting the fan, right? So, they're thinking a lot about critical minerals. They're thinking about renewable energy, like they're thinking about how to be self-sufficient. So yes, it's about liberation from regulation and taxation, but it's also about liberation from the consequences of accelerated capitalism. They're worried about climate change. They're worried about pandemics. They're worried about, it's kind of a bunker mentality, right? So a lot of the people who are behind this also have their own luxury bunkers. They don't want to be in the mess with everybody else. And they also just want,
They also like the idea of corporate towns, presumably, where they get to make up the rules and regulate or not as they wish. We've seen some of that with SpaceX's effort, its own corporate town down in Brownsville, Texas. It's a fascinating can of worms that you open up there. It also reminds me a little bit of settler mentality, that you're just going to create a big fence and arm yourself, and who cares if anybody wants you to be there. And that connects back to the Theo Bros.
Well,
you've got the Tech Bros and
it's
the
more
Theo
than
Bros,
that.
and
It's
you've
more than
alluded
that,
to
Laura.
it.
They actually call it tech Zionism, right? And I think that underlines the fact that, under colonialism, the creation of nation states is pretty arbitrary. It is just kind of like guy with a book decides to form country. And that's what they see in Israel, right? They're like, that proves that you can create a country out of a book. I live in Canada, basically we're just a glorified fur trading station, that got turned into a country. So we shouldn't be too glib about the idea that, oh, how crazy it is to think that you could just create a country out of thin air. The part that I think is different, and that's what Astra was referring to, is that there isn't there isn't the fig leaf of the old colonialism of, we're spreading God's word or anything like that. Like they're bunkering down, and this is what we need to pay attention to. And that's why I think they see what they see in Israel. They see a bunker state, right? And this is where we see Trump talking about a golden dome, which is modeled on Israel's Iron Dome, right? Like the idea that you can have a kind of an apartheid state, wealthy, high-tech, fortressed, as a way to weather the storms that you yourself are unleashing. And so Israel's become a kind of a beacon for both the tech bros and, as you mentioned, the Theo Bros. It kind of brings a lot of this together.
And then we haven't mentioned the eugenics roots of all of this, but Astra, you do write that you see this as a sort of logical extension of first wave eugenics.
Yeah, this is about sorting out who is worthy of protection, of getting into one of those luxury bunkers, and who's being left behind. And one thing we only touch on in the piece, but we think that the COVID era really accelerated that it accelerated, of course, conspiracy theories, but the sense that these folks were going to not face their shared vulnerability and instead kind of enter a sort of politics of denial.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key, what Astra was saying about COVID is really key, because I first started hearing this phrase like sovereign individual when I was researching COVID, kind of conspiracy culture, and it is really a rejection of the idea that we owe each other anything by right of our shared humanity, and a kind of rebellion against this idea that we need to think about ourselves as a society, right? Like Margaret Thatcher said, there is no such thing as society, only individual, men and women and families. And I think these are a lot of people who believed that, and we are, and as these various shocks hit, as the consequences of inaction on so many fronts, an acceleration of extraction and deregulation, the consequences really hit. And then we're seeing the Trump administration remove the last remaining safeguards of, food inspection and water inspection, and even knowing what's going on. They really, like, a lot of this also has to do with AI, frankly, and the fact that, and this is why I think we're seeing more and more of what we're calling end times fascism coming out of Silicon Valley. This is the next bubble. This is where the money is. And everybody involved knows that AI is absolutely incompatible with any of the climate targets, the net zero targets that these companies who bragged about their green credentials just a couple of years ago, they realized that there's absolutely no way that they can even greenwash, right? I mean, we had Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, testifying before Congress saying, this industry is going to have to triple its energy use. And though we believe there's going to be some magical next gen nuclear that's going to save us, it's not ready now. So we're going to have to use gas. So the point is, Laura, they deeply know. These are not our old climate deniers, right? They absolutely know that at the heart of their business model is a destabilization of life on Earth, which means in the near term that many, many more people are going to have to move, try to find safety, which is why they're absolutely focused on borders and migration. And that is the context in which we're seeing a roaring comeback of eugenics, because as Astra said, eugenics is the work of sorting who deserves to live and who deserves to die, who deserves to have their genes continue, right? And that's why this is all, we have pronatalism, so-called pronatalism, more white babies, more Western babies, coexisting with infanticide in Gaza, right? So I think that these really monstrous ideas, which never fully go away, they kind of submerge for a while, then they come back. They come back not at arbitrary points. They come back when they're needed in order to justify a kind of a culling. And that's why it emerged during COVID in the way that it did, was people wanted to act as if it wasn't happening because it was not profitable. It was hurting their bottom lines.
Hello, dear listeners, it's Laura. For 135 years, workers around the world have taken to the streets on May 1st to stand up against exploitation and fight for fair treatment and justice. In that spirit, we continue to dedicate ourselves to reporting on resistance, especially to fascism. We've hit the road running, reporting first and early on Bernie Sanders' Fighting Oligarchy tour, and in our report from Selma on the African-American experience of fascism in the USA. We're committed to following the story and going where the important action and wisdom is, but we can't do it without your help, which is why we've launched the Laura Flanders and Friends Resistance Reporting Fund, and it's why we're asking our viewers and listeners like you to contribute to it. We are non-commercial and advertising-free. We're beholden to no party or corporation. But that freedom comes at a price. If you're able to help us pay for the time and labor and concrete costs that are associated with real reporting, please do it. Make a one-time donation or make it monthly. And in so doing, you'll be helping to keep us on the air and free for all in these dangerous, difficult, important times. All the details are at lauraflanders.org/donate. Thanks for being part of our community. The other thing that seems to have come back no holes barred is machismo and misogyny. And we've talked about bros. This isn't an accident. I mean, we used to talk about sacrifice zones. I remember once saying, women can relate to sacrifice zones because we have so often been sacrificed. But that connection between this disregard for women, and we see it in so many of the cabinet members of the Trump administration, in Trump himself, of course, held civilly liable for sexual abuse, in Sam Altman, the creator of OpenAI. Recently, Carol Cadwalladr, your colleague at The Guardian, gave a TED talk in which she literally said to him, AI is stealing my words, stealing my thinking, and you have no right to it. And his response was kind of like the rapist's response was, well, get used to it. Nothing you can do. It's inevitable. How do we roll that back? Or where do you see the vulnerabilities in that, Astra?
Yeah, I mean, I think this connects to the discussion about eugenics. One thing we touch on in the piece is the self-conscious attacks on empathy from these guys. So you actually have someone like Elon Musk saying that empathy is the fundamental weakness of Western civilization. You have a new wave of Christian influencers writing books about toxic empathy. And so this stigmatization of concern for others, right? And in a machismo kind of vein. So you have a figure like Mark Zuckerberg, who told Joe Rogan, right, we want to bring back aggression, it's a self-conscious effort, and it is part of this larger end times fascist pivot that we're talking about. So, I think part of how we roll that back is by saying, no, we refuse to do this sorting. We refuse to, not be empathetic. And so I think there's something there. But what was so enlightening for me about working on this piece with Naomi, and she was saying, these people are preppers. They're really preparing for the end of the world, right? They are abandoning this place. They are traitors. And so we respond to them in part by being committed, by committing to where we are, by being committed to other people. And it sounds very simple, but I think there's something really fundamental and profound about that when you realize the scale to which these folks have decided to embrace this politics of contempt and abandonment, and the way they're not in denial about climate change. They're not in denial about the emergencies we face. They've acknowledged them, and they've decided, what, we're going to throw gas on the fire.
I mean, just to add something there, Laura, sorry. I mean, as you know, and as is the case for you as well, Laura, like we've been at this for a long time, right? We know, we know the story of how neoliberal capitalism was sold to all of us, right? There was a horizon, there was a future. It was going to be great, in the 90s. It was like we were going to build this one world. Remember the IBM ad, Solutions for a Small Planet? I mean, it was this big happy family. We were going to it was going to spread freedom and democracy around the globe. It was its own kind of utopian project. Now, I didn't believe in it, and I have spent my adult life refuting and making arguments for why this promise was never going to be fulfilled. But what we need to understand is that the right has changed too. Even if there are some of the same players, the right has changed too, because they're no longer promising any of that, right? I mean, you think about where Project 2025 came from. It came from the Heritage Foundation. I know the Heritage Foundation. I've been tracking what they do after shocks and disasters, for a very long time. They were the organization after Hurricane Katrina that came up with their wish list, right, of what they call 25 free market solutions to Hurricane Katrina and high oil prices. It was the usual low taxes, deregulation zones, more oil drilling, but it wasn't a Christian theostate. It wasn't like they have become much, much more extreme because they don't see a future, like they don't see a way out. And that is an opportunity for us, because to be up against opponents who don't believe in the future, who've already written it off, who are coming up with their escape hatches, is actually potentially very mobilizing and very radicalizing for people if we can look at it. So many people post this article of mine in Astra going, it's a long, bleak read, but please read it. And we don't see it that way. We believe it's galvanizing as well as bleak.
You talk about some things needing to end, and I want to make sure that, I agree. I think this is one of the unique aspects of what you've contributed to this discourse. They really have an end in mind, and we have an end to some things in mind, or progressives have an end to some things in mind. And I guess one of my questions is, could this be just some kind of ketamine-addled fantasy on their part? Because if you look right now, you've got Google in court, possibly facing a breakup. You've got Tesla's value of stock going down like 40% since the beginning of the year. You've got Katy Perry catching hell for going up in that ridiculous jaunt with Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin. And the whole country kind of horrified when the SpaceX rocket rained down garbage across the southeast of this country. What are their chances, really? Astra, Naomi, who wants to go?
Well, I think that we shouldn't. I think we should take seriously the threat, right? Because our point is that this is a response. In-time fascism is a response to real material conditions, right? The planet is warming. We know, for example, that the financial sector is issuing reports now that are saying, well, we're heading into a world that blows past the Paris Agreement standards, right? And so we're going to make our investments based on that. We know that AI, whether its promise meets the hype, is going to demand, as Naomi said, increased energy consumption, and they are making sure that that's a federal priority. So, I think the point is that there are these real material realities that are driving this elite political formation that's saying, okay, fine, we're going to bet on the fact that the planet is heating up and the inequality is spiraling. So I think that, there's a lot of hype, but also there's something very real and very kind of terrifying about that. And we need to take this seriously. And our point is that, when we were writing this piece, there was a lot of attention to sort of the fissures in the Trump coalition, right? The way that Steve Bannon was blasting Elon Musk, and the sort of divide between the sort of ethno-nationalists and the tech bros. And it's really important to look at what aligns them. What are they connecting around? And they're connecting around this, this anti-human ideology. So, we think it's really urgent. I think it's really urgent.
Well, so I guess my question is, what are we connecting around? And you right. lay out that we should, and culturally we ought to, but I wonder if it's not in a little way kind of happening. Naomi.
Yeah, I mean, there is this aspect to this whole like prepperism for the super rich, where they really do believe we're coming for them. And some of this is a kind of a fantasy. Maybe they've watched the same movies we have, where they're just imagining. I mean, honestly, Laura, I believe that they can't believe what they've gotten away with. This is what I think is a great deal of this is driven by. I mean, what must it feel like to have this amount of wealth? Like we say it over and over again, like Elon Musk is the richest man alive. We've never seen wealth concentration like this. We could see the first trillionaires. Like the level of wealth that they have, I think is creating panic. that is not entirely, as you say, it's not entirely a fever dream, because it is true. And I think what pushed, Elon Musk over the edge and to the right is much less having a trans kid. I think that's been overplayed as, their child has said, not a child, a young adult. Um, but that it's the threat of regulation, right? It's that Europe started to actually regulate these tech companies. There started to be antitrust action in the United States. And one of the weirdest details in our piece is, we started, unfortunately, listening to, and reading way too much of Peter Thiel, and his colleague Alexander Karp, who's CEO of Palantir. And there is this new wave of religion sweeping Silicon Valley, and now Peter Thiel, despite his gay party lifestyle, claims that he's actually, a religious Christian, and he believes that the Antichrist is here on Earth, and his best guess for who it is Greta Thunberg. And he has said this over and over again. And if you listen to him, it seems completely off the wall, but he reasons it out that he has said this multiple times, that Greta wants everyone to ride a bicycle, which is, kind of a caricature of Greta's position. She does ride bicycles, but, he says, and he says it sounds fine, but the only way her agenda could be fulfilled is with a global government that regulated greenhouse gas emissions to the degree that that would be tyranny, and that is worse than climate change, right? So that is his. So what becomes clear when you listen to them is they're terrified that we will come to our senses and stop them. Whether it's the form of like torches outside of their bunkers, or whether it's the form of us just finally seriously saying your business model is at war with life on Earth, and no, you are not going to get to put your foot on the pedal and build, your AI fantasy world and drain our real world of our water, our jobs, our energy, and set the whole thing on fire. And I think they deeply know how dangerous their agenda is. And frankly, I think they can't believe that we haven't fully woken up to fight them already. And they're trying to get ready for that, what they see as inevitable, which is what all the bunkering is about.
I mean, the other thing we learned from COVID is the delicacy and vulnerability of our supply chains. And you've said it, they cannot have the AI future that they imagine with the resources the planet has. There are also vulnerabilities in terms of their just general supply chain for the products and processes that they're invested in. Are there possibilities for disruption there that we haven't thought about, maybe labor ones? I think of Sarah Nelson, the flight attendants union, talking about how few airports would actually have to go dark in order for the entire world economy to come to a halt. So are there new pressure points that we could be thinking about?
I mean, I think, yeah, there are always, pressure points and I think, the left is obviously talking about the possibility of a general strike in 2028. We need to think strategically about supply chains. And I think, part of that strategizing needs to be taken seriously, as we try to say in the piece. Why is Trump talking about annexing Greenland or Canada, right? This is bluster that is actually based in a kind of prepperism at scale, right? This is really about critical minerals and resources and water. And so I think that should inform our strategizing as we think about where there are sort of material vulnerabilities. I also just want to say, I think, what we try to say in this piece is we should be taking deep offense at this. When Eric Schmidt's testifying in Congress, he's saying, hey, the tech industry is going to need to burn all of this energy because we are creating a higher consciousness, something higher than humanity, this, artificial general intelligence. And who is he to say that it's higher than us, right? Who is he to say that we should all be sacrificed for the machine? So we also, there's potential for something very unifying here, which is to say, yeah, it's not just a humanist movement, it's a more than human movement to say, we want this planet to be protected. We don't care about Mars and a few guys and a few robots blasting off to space, right? We care about this place. So, Naomi brought in this idea of here-ness at the end of the piece, and just, reckoning with how radical that is when you're facing folks who have given up on the future. To say, No, this is about all of us aligning against people who, have some delusion, this lethal and self-serving delusion that we should burn this all down for some intelligence that, is not even animate, that isn't real.
Talk more about that here-ness concept, Naomi. I've been thinking about it for a long time. This idea that could we not root our sense of citizenship on the planet, as opposed to
Yeah.
national boundaries or all the rest. You say arts and culture could help us here. Are
Well, to be
helping.
honest, I think that the seed of this article, I've been thinking about the rapture fantasy for a long time, and how we have these secular versions of it. I started covering private disaster response when I wrote the Shock Doctrine, and it just accelerated after that. There was even a short-lived airline called HelpJet, which marketed itself as like turn your disaster into a luxury vacation. So the idea was that if you were rich enough, you could be a member of HelpJet, and that if there was a hurricane coming to your beachfront property, HelpJet would send a limousine to your house, take you to the airport, and whisk you away. And I thought, this is the rapture. It's just down here on Earth, right? Like you don't need heaven because you have the private jet that's going to take you to your luxury vacation. We've been puzzling about this and also trying to understand how central Christian Zionism is to the support for Israel, because I think it's something that, as somebody who's been opposed to Israeli violence for a very long time, that I haven't really contended with, I think, enough. And then I interviewed the amazing musician Anoni of Anoni and the Johnsons, when she happened to come to Vancouver for a show, and I asked if I could interview her because she sings so powerfully about the apocalyptic sort of fever dreams, right? She has this incredible song called 4 Degrees, where she has this lyric like, I want to see it burn. I want to see all the animals die. And she's like in the imaginary. And so I asked her, what do you see as the connection between the attack on trans bodies like hers and the attacks on the earth of this project? And she said, well, it's all the rapture. This is their fantasy. And it's about escaping the body. It's about escaping the mother. And then she said this thing that I thought just really kind of inspired me. She said, have you ever stopped to consider that this might have been her best idea? I don't know, maybe you could play a clip from it. It's such a beautiful moment. And that, as a Jewish person who's finding my own heritage in the Jewish Labor Bund and this idea of here-ness, I think so many of us have, if we dig back far enough, traditions that really are about committing to place, right? That are not nationalist, but are really about cherishing the sacredness of here. And if we weave all of that together, I think we might have a really beautiful program. Yeah, originally we were thinking about calling the piece like the leavers and the stayers. Like they're all leaving in their own minds, right? They don't personally think they're going to die. They think they're going to be saved. But they're not interested in saving the rest of us or in appreciating like the actual beauty and wonders of this place, and that is just so obscene. that's so, I think any child would be so horrified by that, because children are so in touch with the beauty and wonder of this world. Though diminishing, there's still a lot to be awed by and to protect. So it's not a kind of a traditional material Marxist political program, and we're not, like Astra is the founder of the Debt Collective. I think we still believe in material change, but I think we've both gotten to a point where we're not sure it's enough, right? I mean, and this is part of the reason why it's important to understand that they're working with very powerful myths, right? That the myth of the rapture, the myth like Armageddon, like these are stories that even if you're not religious, you've been exposed to them your whole life. They're encoded in like almost every like Hollywood action movie, And so it's in you, it's in us, it's in our imaginary. But there are other stories that are also in us. And yeah, we don't think we're going to win just with material offers.
I love that we're getting to this part in the conversation, and I like the idea of leavers and stayers. And what you've just said, Naomi, makes me think, Astra, of your book, Solidarity. I mean, talk about other stories and other narratives. I guess the question that I'm left with is, how do we build that connectedness? Somebody said on our called it recently the linked arm underground. How do we build that other story that isn't just about fear? I worry that the end times is a fear thought, but the staying isn't going to be easy, but I want to do it.
Yeah. Well, by abandoning the future, they've kind of ceded that to us, right? So one thing we can do is claim the future and start presenting a vision for something beyond this crisis. And what I'm actually really heartened by the fact I feel like I see the word solidarity everywhere now. I feel like there are surprising people, David Brooks in the New York Times, talking about building a wide movement. We can roll our eyes, but the fact is that there's something about this crisis. There's something about um, the extremism of the people in the White House right now that is causing people to go, holy, oh no, we need to actually band together. So I think solidarity is in the air. But one of the points of the Solidarity book is solidarity is not spontaneous. It does have to be built, and it is built through stories and it's built through actions. And so, one of the harrowing things about writing this piece was watching the propaganda, this anti-empathy, anti-immigrant propaganda, watching Kristi Noem's videos, right? Watching the horrible things that the White House is tweeting, people in shackles, and their glib portraits of human suffering, looking at what's happening in El Salvador right now. They know that their attitude is also isn't spontaneous, that they have to engineer this kind of hatred, that they have to work to build the kind of toxic bonds that they're dependent on. So we need to do that work on our side and tell different stories. But I think there's actually tremendous potential right now, and there's the potential for a coalition of allies that's pretty surprising. And could be potentially really powerful.
All right, I love that. And I think that's a good point to ask you our closing question.
Can I talk about the Pope a minute?
Oh yeah.
Yes, go for it.
One of the things we get into is that, like Astra was saying, the ways in which to engineer this, you actually need to convince people to abandon really central parts of themselves. I mean, most people have a built-in sense of empathy and connection with other people, right? So you need you need to create these stories of why you don't need to care, right? Like why you shouldn't feel that thing, why it's okay to step over that person, whether literally or figuratively. And so JD Vance is really important in this story as well, because he actually has made these appeals to Catholic, ancient Catholic theology, to claim something that is sometimes translated from Latin as ordered love, so that your first responsibility is to love your family, and then you can love your neighbors, and then you can love your community. But but by the time you get to people outside your country, you really don't owe them anything, right? And that there's something actually wrong and almost perverted about caring beyond your inner circle. And, we know that one of the last things Pope Francis did was meet with JD Vance, but he had actually responded to that. He was so offended by it, by the idea of what he referred to as these concentric circles of love, and it being actually the opposite of what his understanding of Catholic teachings were. It's really unruly, right? That it's about opening your heart as widely as possible. And we know that the church has failed over and over and over again to live up to that promise. And this Pope was not a saint and didn't either. But I think that he made some really important decisions about not prioritizing, the so-called culture wars, and prioritizing standing with the poor, standing with people, standing with refugees, standing with people in Gaza. And it's worth remembering so soon after his passing that he made this radical decision to name himself Francis, who ministered to birds and plants, and was this kind of like animist figure, right? And challenged some of the like this core, this what is really at the heart of this, which is the idea of creating a hierarchy of life, not just human life but all of life, right? And it was that pyramid of being, where you have like God at the top, and then you have angels, and then you have men, and they at the very bottom you've got like rocks, right? And it was such a false understanding of how our world works, which is it's a web, it's a network, everything is interconnected. Um, so, I think even
His lines, weren't his lines at the very end something like, "We must till and keep the garden which is everybody's garden"?
Well, he rejected the idea of dominion, actually, which is like this idea that it's all there for us, that it's all ours, that we own it. He wrote this climate encyclical, and I don't think he used the word dominion. He used the word care instead, which is very interesting. And I think it does point to the possibilities for unlikely alliances. And, as Astra always reminds us, like, solidarity isn't about finding connection with people who you are the same as. It's about finding connection across difference. And this vision that we're calling end times fascism is so radical, and it's at war with so much and so many, that it does create this challenge for us to see who we can form alliances with, which doesn't mean that we erase our differences. It doesn't mean that we, that we lie about what's true. But it does call for strategy, because everything is so on the line. I think it's a kind of a ferocious love. I don't believe it's bleak. I think it sort of should awaken like an open-hearted love for everything that's on the line.
I love it. So our closing question is, what do you think is the story the future will tell of now? And I guess it indicates where we are on this kind of end times fascism scale, that we think there is a future and a story will be told. So what do you think it is, Astra?
Ooh. I'm not sure I think this is the story that will be told, but I hope this is the story that will be told. And, I'd love this to be a pivot where we actually challenge, there are many types of supremacy that we need to challenge. We need to challenge white supremacy. We need to challenge misogyny, right? Patriarchy. But I think we need to challenge anthropocentrism. This idea that, as Naomi said, there's a great chain of being, and humans are at the top, separate and supreme. I think that is at the root of many of our problems, and challenging that hierarchy and building a politics of interdependence, not just with other humans, but with the natural world, I think could be revolutionary in the best sense of the word.
I think the story that we might tell, if we do everything that we possibly can in this moment, is that a bunch of very silly, very shallow men thought that daddy was back, but then they found out that mommy was back.
You won't escape the mother rising. Thank you, too. It's really been such a pleasure hanging out with you. And I feel very actually positive about the future. I think we can live there.
Yay.
We can get there, and we can live there. We have to just do a lot of work.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's great having you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yay. Never did I think that final question was so radical as it feels like in this conversation.
Thanks for taking the time to listen to the full conversation with award-winning journalist and international best-selling author Naomi Klein and author, filmmaker, and co-founder of the TED Collective, Astra Taylor. Together, they recently co-authored a revelatory essay for The Guardian titled The Rise of End Times Fascism. These audio exclusives are made possible thanks to our member supporters. Please join our members now by making a one-time donation or by making it monthly. Go to patreon.com/Laura Flanders and Friends. That's also where you'll find more information on this conversation in the episode notes posted there. That's patreon.com patreon.com/Laura Flanders and friends. And thanks again to all our member supporters.